Rain didn't fall in Seoul tonight, it plummeted, a vertical sea drowning the neon glow of the Gangnam district. Kang Doyun, the man they called the Iron Ghost of the Seoul underworld, stepped into the private elevator of the Lotte World Tower. He was alone. That was his first mistake. In his world, solitude was a luxury paid for in blood. At 34, Doyun had spent half his life building an empire of shadows, a network of loyalty and fear that kept the peace between the warring factions of the peninsula. He had just finished a grueling negotiation with the Japanese Yakuza syndicates, and his mind was drifting to a small, crumpled drawing in his inner breast pocket, a stick-figure man and a little girl holding hands. Myri. His daughter. His secret. He pressed the button for the 101st floor. The doors hissed shut, a sound like a guillotine blade sliding into place. The elevator began its smooth, pressurized ascent. 10th floor. 20th, 30th. Then, at the 55th floor, the world died. A sound like a thunderclap echoed through the shaft, a heavy, metallic clunk followed by the shriek of safety brakes grinding against steel rails. The elevator jolted so violently that Doyun was thrown against the mirrored wall, the glass spiderwebbing behind his head. The car swayed, suspended over a half-mile drop, as the lights flickered and transitioned into a haunting, emergency crimson. Doyun was on his feet in a second, his hand instinctively reaching for the Glock 17 at his hip. But you cannot shoot a falling building. The intercom crackled. The static was thick, but the voice that emerged was as clear as a funeral bell. Checkmate, Doyun. Doyun's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. He recognized that voice. Choi Daeshim. The man Doyun had supposedly retired 2 years ago. The man who had been obsessed with Doyun's downfall since they were both street soldiers. Choi, Doyun said, his voice a steady, terrifying calm. You always did have a flair for the theatrical. Trapping a man in a box. It's a bit cliché, don't you think? Cliché is effective, Doyun, Choi's voice chuckled through the speaker, distorted by a digital scrambler. You're in a pressurized vacuum. I've disabled the manual overrides and jammed every cellular frequency within a 3-block radius. But here's the best part, look at the ceiling. Doyun tilted his head back. Through the translucent emergency hatch, he saw a small, blinking LED light attached to a block of putty-like substance. Thermite, Doyun whispered. Exactly, Choi replied. In exactly 15 minutes, those charges will melt through the primary and secondary suspension cables. You can either drop 500 feet to the basement and become a smudge on the concrete, or you can do what I've wanted for 10 years. Give me the encryption keys to the Kim family's offshore accounts. The wealth of an empire for the life of its king. A fair trade? Doyun didn't answer immediately. He scanned the car. The mirrored walls were reinforced. The floor was solid steel. The hatch was electromagnetically locked from the outside. He was in a masterpiece of execution. I don't have the keys on me, Choi. You know how this works. They're split between 3 different servers. Don't lie to me. Choi screamed, his composure snapping. I know you carry a cold storage drive. I know you were planning to flee. I know about the girl, Doyun. I know about Myri. The mention of his daughter's name changed the atmosphere in the car. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and Doyun's sudden, sharp rage. If you touch her, Doyun said, his voice dropping an octave, I will ensure that death is the kindest thing that ever happens to you. You aren't in a position to threaten, Iron Ghost. You have 14 minutes of oxygen and cable life left. Tick-tock. The intercom went dead. Doyun sat on the floor. To a casual observer, it would look like he was giving up. In reality, he was entering a state of combat zen. He closed his eyes, visualizing the blueprints of the Lotte World Tower. He had studied them when he bought the penthouse. He knew the elevator shafts were equipped with a dual redundancy braking system, but Choi had likely sabotaged the magnets. He pulled the drawing out of his pocket. Myri had sent it from California. She was safe there, protected by his best men, but Choi's words haunted him. I know about the girl. If Choi knew, then the safety Doyun had built was a lie. If Doyun died in this box, his organization would fracture. His enemies would hunt down every piece of his legacy, starting with the 6-year-old girl who had her mother's eyes. He couldn't die. Not tonight. He stood up and removed his bespoke silk tie, then his charcoal jacket. He wrapped the jacket around his right hand and forearm, creating a makeshift shield. He looked at the control panel. He didn't try to press the buttons. Instead, he used the butt of his gun to smash the plastic casing. Wires spilled out like the guts of a mechanical beast. Miho, Doyun whispered, hoping his second-in-command was monitoring the sub-channel on his watch. If you're listening, I'm at the 55th floor. I'm going to trigger a manual drop to clear the thermite range. Catch me at the 40th. There was no verbal reply, but his watch vibrated twice. Confirmed. Doyun began to strip the insulation from the wires. He needed to short the electromagnetic lock on the ceiling hatch without detonating the thermite prematurely. It was a surgical operation performed with a butcher's tools. The heat in the car was rising. The thermite above was already beginning to glow, the chemical reaction starting to eat into the primary cable. Sparks showered down onto the glass hatch, sizzling like angry hornets. 10 minutes left. Doyun climbed onto the handrail, balancing precariously. He shoved the exposed wires into the hatch's locking mechanism. A shower of blue sparks erupted, burning his cheek, but the clack of the magnets releasing was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He pushed the hatch open. The shaft was a cavern of darkness, lit only by the red emergency lights of the floor landings. The primary cable above him was glowing a dull, lethal orange. He didn't climb out. Not yet. He looked down through the crack in the elevator doors. Choi's men would be waiting at the nearest floor landing. He was a rat in a vertical maze. Choi! Doyun shouted toward the ceiling, knowing the microphones were still live. I'm sending the first half of the key. Check your terminal. It was a bluff. He was buying seconds. Good boy, Choi's voice boomed. I see the packet incoming. Keep it coming, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to say goodbye to your daughter. This video is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. This story is intended for mature audiences as it contains themes of organized crime, stylized violence, and suspense. Parental discretion is advised. Doyun's eyes turned to ice. He reached into the wiring of the car again, but this time he wasn't looking for a lock. He was looking for the emergency stop bypass. Outside, the storm reached a crescendo. A bolt of lightning illuminated the skyscraper, a needle of glass piercing the clouds. Inside the shaft, Doyun was no longer a man, he was a predator. He stepped out onto the roof of the elevator car. The heat from the thermite was blistering, even through his shoes. He could hear the steel cables groaning, the sound of 1,000 tiny wires snapping one by one. Snap. Snap. Twang. Miho, now. Doyun roared. He fired his Glock into the secondary safety brakes. Simultaneously, Miho, from a control room 5 floors below, overrode the winch. The elevator didn't just fall, it plummeted. The sensation of weightlessness was a brief, terrifying ecstasy. Doyun crouched low, his fingers digging into the metal edges of the car. The wind whistled past him at 80 miles per hour. Above him, the thermite charge detonated, but because the car was in freefall, the molten metal missed the roof, splashing harmlessly against the concrete walls of the shaft. Brake! Doyun screamed. The car jerked. The emergency magnets engaged with a violent screech that sent sparks flying like a firework display. Doyun was nearly thrown into the abyss, his legs dangling over the edge of the car as it came to a dead stop at the 40th floor. He didn't hesitate. He knew Choi's men would be watching the 55th and the lobby. The 40th floor was a mechanical transition zone, empty, dark, and full of heavy machinery. He kicked in the floor-level doors and rolled into the hallway just as a hail of bullets shredded the elevator car he had just vacated. "He's out," a voice screamed from the darkness. Sector 4. "Kill him." Doyun was in a low crouch, moving before the muzzle flashes faded. He didn't use his gun yet. He needed to conserve ammunition. He moved through the shadows of the massive HVAC units like a ghost. The first guard appeared around a corner, a tactical flashlight cutting through the gloom. Doyun didn't flinch. He stepped into the light, grabbed the guard's weapon barrel, and redirected it. Crack. A single punch to the windpipe. Doyun caught the man's body before it hit the floor, stripping him of a flashbang and a radio. 3 men down, Doyun whispered into the stolen radio, disguised his voice. "He's heading for the stairs. Sector 2, move in." "Copy that," came the reply. Doyun smiled. It was a cold, jagged thing. He wasn't trapped anymore. Choi Daeshim had made the mistake of thinking the elevator was the trap. He didn't realize that for Kang Doyun, the entire world was a trap, and Doyun was the one who knew how to spring the jaws. Doyun reached the stairwell. He knew he couldn't go down to the lobby, that's where the bottleneck was. He had to go up. Choi would be at the top, watching the show, likely in the observation deck where he could see the fall. He began to climb. His lungs burned. His ribs, bruised from the elevator jolt, screamed with every breath. But he thought of the drawing. He thought of Saran, the woman he had loved and lost, and the daughter who was her living legacy. He reached the 60th floor when his radio crackled. "Doyun? Are you still alive?" It was Choi. He sounded nervous now. The Iron Ghost was living up to his name. "I'm coming for you, Choi," Doyun said, not bothering to hide his voice this time. "I'm in the walls. I'm in the shadows. Look at your men. How many of them are still answering their radios?" Silence. "I have 50 men in this building, Doyun. You're one man." "I'm the only man that matters," Doyun replied. He burst through the doors of the 65th floor, the luxury spa level. It was a maze of frosted glass, indoor pools, and steam rooms. The mist was thick here, piped in by the automated systems. 3 guards stood near the infinity pool, their rifles raised. They couldn't see him, but they could hear the heavy thud of his boots. Doyun pulled the pin on the stolen flashbang. He didn't throw it at them, he threw it into the water. Boom! The underwater concussion shattered the pool's glass walls. Thousands of gallons of water erupted into the room, a localized tsunami that swept the guards off their feet. In the chaos, Doyun moved. He fired 3 times. 3 targets. 3 headshots. He didn't stop to check the bodies. He ran for the service elevator, the one used by staff. It was a separate system, uncompromised by Choi's hack. To understand why Kang Doyun was willing to burn the tallest building in Seoul to the ground, one had to understand the summer of 2012. It was the only time in his life he had breathed air that didn't taste like gunpowder. He was 21, a rising star in the Kim syndicate, tasked with guarding the boss's niece, Saran. She was a whirlwind of American audacity and Korean grace, visiting from Los Angeles. Doyun was her shadow, a silent sentinel in a black suit, but Saran had a way of looking through the suit and seeing the boy underneath. "You look like you're waiting for the world to end, Doyun," she had told him one night on a balcony overlooking the Han River. "In my line of work, it usually does," he'd replied. They had fallen in love in the spaces between his duties. It was a fragile, stolen thing. They met in hidden tea houses and walked through the ancient palaces of Seoul after the tourists had gone home. For 3 months, Doyun forgot he was a monster. He started dreaming of a life involving a desk and a daughter, not a gun and a grave. But the Mafia is a jealous god. Choi Daeshim, then a rival captain, had seen them. He didn't tell the boss, he used it. He threatened to have Doyun executed for staining the bloodline unless Saran left immediately. The night she disappeared, she left a note, "I am going back to the light so you don't have to stay in the dark. Protect the future." Doyun had spent 12 years thinking the future meant the syndicate. He was wrong. It was a living, breathing girl named Myri. Back in the present, the elevator shaft was a memory, but the skyscraper was still a vertical fortress. Doyun moved through the 80th floor, the executive level. This wasn't a spa, it was a maze of open-plan offices and server rooms. Choi's elite guard, a group of mercenaries known as the Hounds, had finally organized. They weren't street thugs, they were ex-special forces. Doyun entered the main server room. The air was freezing, chilled by massive cooling units to protect the data of Korea's elite. The hum of the servers was a low, rhythmic thrum, like the heartbeat of the city. A laser sight painted a red dot on Doyun's chest. He dove behind a server rack just as a burst of submachine gun fire shredded the plastic casing above him. "You're slowing down, Doyun," a voice echoed through the server farm. It was Lee Sang-woo, Choi's lead mercenary. The elevator drop took the edge off, didn't it? Doyun didn't respond. He pulled a small canister of liquid nitrogen from a maintenance kit on the wall. He knew the server room's fire suppression system was triggered by heat, but it could be fooled by pressure. He threw the canister toward a heat sensor and shot it mid-air. The room didn't explode, it hissed. A cloud of supercooled gas and fire-suppressant foam erupted, turning the room into a whiteout. Doyun pulled his thermal goggles from his belt, standard equipment for a man who lived in the dark. Through the goggles, the world turned into shades of orange and blue. He saw the Hounds moving in a tactical diamond formation, their heat signatures glowing like embers in the fog. Doyun didn't use his gun. It was too loud, too revealing. He pulled a ceramic blade, undetectable by metal scanners, sharp enough to split a hair. He moved like a shark in milk. The first mercenary died without a sound, a quick incision to the femoral artery. The second went down with a crushed larynx. By the time Lee Sang-woo realized his team was being picked off, Doyun was standing behind him. "Choi promised you a kingdom," Doyun whispered, the blade touching Lee's neck. "He's giving you a cemetery." "Go to hell," Lee spat. "I've been there for 12 years, Doyun said. "I'm the tour guide." A quick, surgical strike, and the Hounds were silenced. Doyun took Lee's radio and a high-frequency jammer. He needed to ensure Choi couldn't call for outside help before the final. The 95th floor was a cavernous, industrial wasteland of raw concrete and massive machinery. This was the building's stabilization center, home to the tuned mass damper, a gargantuan, 660-ton steel sphere suspended by thick cables. It was designed to sway in opposition to the wind, keeping the skyscraper from snapping under the pressure of the storm. As Doyun stepped into the chamber, the floor groaned. The massive golden sphere was already in motion, swinging with a rhythmic, low-frequency thrum that vibrated in Doyun's marrow. "I knew you'd make it here," a voice echoed. Out of the shadows stepped the Ghost Squad, Choi's final insurance policy. For men, dressed in matte black urban camouflage, wielding tactical shotguns and electrified batons. They didn't talk. They moved in a synchronized, hunter-killer, formation. Doyun timed his movement with the swing of the damper. As the 660-ton ball swung toward the center, he sprinted into its shadow. The first mercenary fired, the buckshot sparks dancing off the golden surface of the sphere. Doyun used the momentum of the sway, jumping onto the damper's catwalk. The battle became a vertical nightmare. Doyun was fighting on a moving platform 500 meters in the air, with no railings and a floor that refused to stay level. He used the Iron Ghost technique, momentum redirection. When a mercenary swung an electrified baton, Doyun didn't block, he pivoted, letting the centrifugal force of the swaying room pull the attacker off balance. He disarmed the second man, snapping his wrist against the damper's tension cables, and kicked him into the dark void between the machinery. One by one, the elite squad fell, unable to match Doyun's desperate, fatherly ferocity. He wasn't just fighting men, he was fighting the very physics of the building. By the time he cleared the floor, Doyun was a ghost made of bruises and blood. He climbed the maintenance ladder to the 100th floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. As Doyun climbed toward the 100th floor, his mind raced. He knew that killing Choi wasn't enough. In the Korean underworld, power was like a vacuum, if he didn't fill it, someone worse would. He pulled out his secondary phone, the one encrypted with the Eclipse protocol. He dialed a number he had hoped never to call. The Minister of Justice. Minister, this is Kang Doyun. Kang. Do you know what time it is? The Lotte Tower is on fire. The fire is an asset, Minister. In 30 minutes, I will send you a data dump. It contains the bank records of Choi Daeshim, the Japanese Yakuza ties, and the names of every politician currently on the Choi payroll. In exchange, you will grant full immunity to my second-in-command, Sung Mi-ho, and provide a permanent witness protection status for a girl named Kim Myri. And you, Kang? What do you get? Doyun looked at his blood-stained hands in the reflection of a gold-leaf door. I get to be a ghost. For real this time. The syndicate will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Let them, Doyun said. I've spent my life hunting back. He hung up. The deal was struck. He had traded his empire for her safety. It was the best deal he had ever made. The 110th floor was where the air began to feel thin. Doyun was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his thigh and his left shoulder was nearly immobile. He used a discarded tie to tourniquet his leg, the pain a sharp, grounding reminder that he was still alive. He reached the grand ballroom. It was a space of impossible luxury, crystal chandeliers the size of cars, floors made of rare Italian marble. Wait. Something was wrong. The ballroom was silent, but the scent was unmistakable. C4. Choi hadn't just rigged the gas lines, he had turned the entire upper third of the building into a dead man's switch. If Doyun killed Choi, the building might come down. It was a classic Choi move, if I can't have the throne, no one can. Doyun moved through the ballroom, his eyes scanning for the detonators. He found them tucked behind the heavy velvet curtains, 6 charges, wired to a central receiver. He wasn't a bomb expert, but he knew how Choi thought. Choi was a man of patterns. He always used a master and slave configuration. Doyun found the master unit. It wasn't a timer, it was a heartbeat monitor. Choi had the detonator linked to his own pulse. If Choi's heart stopped, the 110th floor would vanish. A death trap within a death trap, Doyun muttered, a grim smile touching his lips. He didn't disarm it. Instead, he used his jammer to create a feedback loop. He couldn't stop the bomb, but he could delay the signal transmission by 60 seconds. 1 minute. That was the window he had to kill Choi and get out. Before the final ascent to Choi, Doyun broke into the 105th floor, dark floor, not listed on any public directory. This was Choi's personal archive, a room filled with physical filing cabinets and ancient servers. Choi was a man who didn't trust the cloud, he wanted his secrets where he could touch them. Doyun blew the lock on a heavy steel cabinet labeled Project Saran. Inside, he found a stack of envelopes. They were addressed to him, Kang Doyun, but the stamps were from Los Angeles, dated 2013, 2014, 2016. He opened the first one with trembling fingers. Doyun, I know you think I left because I wanted to. But Choi's men are everywhere. I'm pregnant. I'm naming her Myri. Please, find a way to reach us. The second letter, she looks just like you. She has your stubborn jaw. I tell her stories about the boy by the river. The final letter, dated just months before her death, I'm sick, Doyun. I don't have much time. If you're reading this, please, find our daughter. She is the only light I ever knew. The realization hit Doyun harder than any bullet. Choi hadn't just separated them, he had curated their pain. He had watched Doyun mourn for 12 years while holding the proof that he was loved. A primal scream escaped Doyun's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief that turned into a cold, killing intent. He set the archive on fire. He didn't need the papers. He had the truth. He moved toward the 123rd floor not to reclaim a throne, but to execute a monster. The 123rd floor. The top of the world. Choi Daeshim stood behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, clutching a glass of expensive scotch. His hands were shaking. On the monitors behind him, he saw nothing but static and empty hallways. His death trap had turned into a slaughterhouse, and he was the only one left on the guest list. The heavy mahogany doors of the deck exploded inward. Doyun stepped through the smoke. His shirt was torn, his face was smeared with blood and grease, and his eyes were the color of a winter grave. You look tired, Choi, Doyun said, his voice echoing in the vast, silent room. Choi wasn't just sitting, he had a hostage. A young woman, one of the cleaning staff, trembling with a gun to her head. Drop it, Doyun. Or she dies first. Choi screamed, his eyes wide with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. Doyun didn't drop his gun. You won't kill her, Choi. Because the moment you pull that trigger, your heart rate spikes. And if your heart rate spikes too high, your own bomb triggers. You're trapped by your own cowardice. Choi hesitated. In that split second of doubt, Doyun fired. Not at Choi. He fired at the floor beneath Choi's feet, the glass transition panel. The sequence that followed was a symphony of chaos. The glass cracked. Choi stumbled. The hostage ran. Doyun lunged forward, grabbing Choi by the throat, not to save him, but to ensure he heard the final words. You died the day you threatened my daughter, Doyun hissed. The glass gave way. Doyun watched Choi fall, but his eyes were on his watch. 60, 59. 58. He grabbed the hostage and sprinted for the base jumping equipment he knew was kept in the emergency locker of the observation deck. He strapped the girl to his chest, the parachute harness digging into his wounds. 10, 9. 8. He didn't look back. He dove into the blackness of the Seoul sky. The transition from the inferno of the 123rd floor to the freezing midnight air was a physical shock that nearly stopped his heart. He felt the vacuum of the fall, the wind screaming past his ears at terminal velocity. The girl, the hostage he had saved, was a dead weight against his chest, her eyes squeezed shut. 1,000 feet. 800 feet. The heat of the explosion above cast a flickering orange glow over the falling debris. Doyun saw a shard of glass falling alongside them, reflecting his own face, a mask of grim determination. He reached for the ripcord. Please, hold. Snap. The parachute opened with a sound like a gunshot. The deceleration was so violent Doyun felt his collarbone crack, but the canopy held. They drifted through the smoke of the burning tower, a single white moth in a sky full of fire. The Han River approached. He steered the parachute away from the jagged rocks of the shoreline and toward the deep, dark center of the water. Splash. The water was a silent, crushing weight. Doyun struggled to unbuckle the harness, the heavy silk of the parachute trying to wrap around them like a shroud. He fought through the numbness in his limbs, kicking toward the surface, dragging the girl with him. He broke the surface, gasping for air that didn't taste like ash. He saw Miho's headlights on the bank. Doyun stood at the edge of the broken window, the cold rain washing the blood from his face. Miho walked up behind him, draping a fresh coat over his shoulders. "It's over, boss. The Choi faction is gone. The police are calling it an unfortunate accident involving a disgruntled business partner." Doyun looked at his watch. It was 4 a.m. "Is the plane ready?" At Gimpo Airport, Miho nodded. "But boss, the syndicate needs a leader. If you leave now, the vacuum will." "Let it," Doyun said, turning away from the city he had conquered. "I'm done being a ghost." He pulled out his phone. The jammers were down. He dialed an international number. "Papa?" A small, sleepy voice answered. Doyun's heart, the cold piece of stone he had carried for a decade, finally thawed. "I'm coming home, Myri. For good." As he walked toward the exit, Doyun left the drawing on the floor of the observation deck. It was the only thing of value in the entire building. He didn't need a Mafia throne. He had a flight to catch. The Iron Ghost was gone. Only a father remained. The story of the Korean Mafia boss in the death trap concludes not with a bang, but with a quiet, persistent hope. On the plane, Doyun looks at his hands. The scars are permanent. The memories of the elevator, the server room, the mirrors, and the fire will never leave him. But as the plane touches down at LAX, he sees his reflection in the window. He looks different. The Iron Ghost has stayed behind in the ashes of the Lotte Tower. He walks toward the small white house. He sees Myri. "Papa. I'm here," he says. And as he hugs her, he realizes that the death trap wasn't the building. It was the life he had led before her. He had escaped the ultimate trap, the cycle of violence. He was no longer a king. He was no longer a boss. He was a father. And as the sun rises over the California coast, the story of Kang Doyun finally reaches its true end, the beginning of a life worth living. The story of the Mafia boss in the death trap became a legend in the back alleys of Itaewon and the boardrooms of Gangnam. They said Kang Doyun died in the fire. They said the Iron Ghost had finally met a flame he couldn't put out. 2 weeks later, a man with a slight limp and a new passport walked through the arrivals gate at LAX. He wasn't wearing a bespoke suit. He was wearing jeans and a simple jacket. He took a taxi to a quiet suburb in Orange County. He stood outside a small, white house with a swing set in the front yard. The door opened. A little girl ran out, stopping at the edge of the grass. She looked at the man, her eyes widening as she recognized the face from a crumpled drawing. "Papa?" Doyun knelt down, ignoring the protest of his healing ribs. He opened his arms. "I'm home, Myri." The sun was setting over the Pacific, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Behind him lay a trail of blood, fire, and steel. But ahead of him, there was only the sound of a child's laughter and the promise of a future that wasn't written in ink, but in the quiet, steady beats of a heart that finally had a reason to stay. The Iron Ghost was gone. The father had arrived. And for the first time in his life, Kang Doyun wasn't afraid of the light. If you like this story, please leave a like and drop a comment. Also please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next interesting story. We wish everybody watching a good health and light in our path.